The sky trembles. Clouds churn like boiling iron. Lightning flashes across the horizon, illuminating sleek, silver aircraft slicing through the storm. Tracer rounds streak through the darkness, white-hot lines of death marking the air. Amid the chaos, a voice cuts through. They called it the .50 caliber Browning, a gun that could tear through the heavens themselves. One weapon, small enough to fit on a fighter, yet powerful enough to turn an entire sky into a battlefield where American pilots became predators and the enemy prey. Below, the world is chaos, bombed cities, smoking fields, and the distant roar of engines. Above, planes dance a deadly ballet, wings glinting, machine guns roaring. Each pull of the trigger unleashes a storm, each burst a promise of destruction. Before the .50 cal, the skies were a place of fear for American pilots. Lighter guns, slower rounds, aircraft too fragile, every mission carried the whisper of death. But with this machine gun, something changed. Steel and fire answered speed and courage, and suddenly, the sky belonged to those who dared to dominate it. It was not just a weapon. It was a revolution in the air, a voice that said, "We have arrived, and we will strike with thunder." The early air war. Before the .50 caliber Browning reshaped the skies, American pilots faced a grim reality. The early years of the Second World War were a testament to both bravery and vulnerability. In 1941, as Axis powers spread across Europe and the Pacific, the skies were a hunting ground dominated by enemy aircraft. Japanese Zeros ruled the Pacific, their nimble frames outmaneuvering American planes with terrifying ease. In Europe, Luftwaffe fighters prowled above, their Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs casting long shadows over Allied airfields. Every sortie was a gamble, every engagement a test of endurance and wit. American aircraft were fast, yes, but fast alone would not save lives. Many early models, like the Brewster Buffalo or the P-40 Warhawk, were undergunned. For .30 caliber machine guns, in some models even less, offered little more than a sting when faced with enemy fighters built to last. Pilots learned quickly that speed could only carry them so far. They needed firepower to survive, to fight back, to dominate. Air combat in these early days was chaotic, almost poetic in its danger. Engines screamed, propellers carved the clouds, and pilots, young men barely out of training, faced enemies who had perfected the art of aerial slaughter. Dogfights unfolded in dizzying loops and dives, tracer rounds painting the sky with deadly arcs. Each engagement was a brutal calculus: speed, altitude, positioning, and firepower. One mistake could mean death. One failed burst of gunfire could cost a wingman his life. The United States industrial might was immense, but early war doctrine had underestimated the importance of concentrated aerial firepower. Aircraft were designed to be light, fast, and maneuverable, but at the cost of destructive capacity. Pilots often returned from missions with planes riddled by enemy bullets, adrenaline pumping, and the bitter knowledge that a single .30 caliber burst was rarely enough to bring down a hardened enemy. Against the Zeros or Messerschmitts, American pilots were hunters armed with slingshots facing lions. In the Pacific, the threat was immediate and constant. The Japanese Zero, with its astonishing agility and long-range 20mm cannons, could dance circles around American aircraft. Pilots learned the hard way that outmaneuvering the enemy often meant drawing them into a trap, one in which they prayed their limited firepower would strike true. The sky was a battlefield ruled not only by skill but by the limits of the machine guns mounted on the wings and noses of American planes. It was not just about survival, it was about psychological endurance. Pilots recounted nights in airfields where engines idled like restless beasts, preparing for missions that could be their last. Stories circulated of men who would climb into cockpits with hearts racing, fully aware that their weapons might not be enough. These young airmen became inventors of tactics on the fly, improvising formations, firing sequences, and strafing runs in a desperate attempt to compensate for the inadequacies of their armament. And yet, even in these early years, glimmers of ingenuity appeared. Engineers experimented with heavier guns, synchronized firing mechanisms, and wing-mounted upgrades. Pilots began to dream of a weapon that could end a dogfight decisively, one that could pierce armor, shred fuselage, and make the sky a place where fear was on the enemy's side, not theirs. This was the stage for the .50 caliber Browning, A gun that promised not just parity, but dominance. By late 1941, the United States had already begun to understand the harsh truth of air warfare. Speed and courage alone were insufficient. Without concentrated firepower, even the most skilled pilots were vulnerable. Every failed mission, every lost plane, and every shredded squadron underscored the urgent need for a new kind of aerial weapon. Something fast, powerful, and relentless, a tool that could turn fighters into predators, not prey. As dawn broke over the Pacific Islands, the promise of change glimmered on the horizon. The .50 caliber Browning machine gun, still in testing, was poised to rewrite the rules of air combat. It was a weapon that could fire half-inch bullets at staggering rates, tearing through fuselage and armor alike. In the minds of pilots and engineers alike, hope and strategy began to converge. The early air war had been a crucible of fear and failure, but from it emerged a burning question. What if American pilots had a weapon that could finally match their courage with lethality? The answer would come fast, roaring from the wings of new fighter planes, and it would be absolute. The skies, once arenas of peril for American aviators, were about to become hunting grounds. A predator had been born. The weapon emerges. Amid the chaos of early war losses, a solution emerged not in the air, but in the minds of engineers and the roar of experimental test ranges. The .50 caliber Browning machine gun. Born of necessity, refined by relentless tinkering, and destined to change the face of aerial combat forever. John M. Browning had designed it decades earlier, a weapon of astonishing simplicity and brutal efficiency. But it was in the skies above the Pacific and Europe that its true potential would be realized. Unlike the underpowered .30 calibers that rattled ineffectually against enemy planes, the .50 caliber fired a half-inch slug at nearly 2,700 feet per second, enough to tear through fuselage, sever control cables, and punch through armor with terrifying precision. It was a weapon designed not merely to scare, but to annihilate. Engineers mounted the Browning in wings, synchronized it to fire through propellers, and integrated it into the nose of American fighters. But it was not a plug-and-play solution. The gun's immense power reverberated through airframes, forcing pilots to relearn the art of handling their aircraft under new stresses. Recoil, vibration, and heat became part of the battlefield calculus. But those who mastered it quickly understood its promise. One well-placed burst could decide a fight. Across training fields in America, young pilots ran simulations, strafing mock targets and learning the rhythm of the gun. Every pilot dreamed of taking this weapon to war, of trading fear for dominance. Stories circulated of tests where older guns failed to pierce armor, leaving aircraft to limp back to base, but the Browning cut through like lightning. The world was about to see a transformation. The hunter would become the hunted. By mid-1942, the first squadrons equipped with Browning-armed fighters took to the skies. P-38 Lightnings, P-47 Thunderbolts, and later, the legendary P-51 Mustangs bristled with 6, 8, sometimes even 12 of these guns. The weapon was no longer a prototype, it was the backbone of American aerial firepower. Against nimble Japanese Zeros or heavily armored German Focke-Wulfs, the Browning leveled the field, giving pilots the chance not just to survive, but to dominate. Early combat reports told of transformation. Enemy planes, once untouchable phantoms darting through clouds, were now torn apart in midair. Wingmen who had prayed for survival found themselves witnessing entire enemy formations disintegrate under concentrated fire. Pilots described it as an angel of death, a tool that demanded skill but rewarded decisively. Precision replaced panic. Aggression replaced fear. The skies were no longer a roulette wheel of death. They were the hunting grounds of a new predator. And yet, it was not just the technology, it was the mindset it inspired. Pilots learned to trust the weapon implicitly, to synchronize maneuvers with bursts of fire, to become extensions of the machine. Dogfights evolved into deadly dances of speed, strategy, and firepower. The Browning did not just kill, it empowered. It turned American aviators into tacticians, capable of confronting superior numbers and turning the tide of engagements. Across theaters, the impact was immediate. Enemy losses skyrocketed. Allied morale surged. The weapon, long conceived in workshops and tested on isolated ranges, now roared through the skies, a herald of a new era. For the first time, American airmen could confront enemy dominance head-on and walk away alive. In the quiet moments between sorties, pilots whispered about it with reverence. Not just as a tool, but as a symbol of change. The early air war had been a nightmare of vulnerability, but the .50 caliber Browning machine gun promised something else: control, lethality, and finally survival. The Hunter had become the apex predator. The firepower revolution. By the skies of 1943, the .50 caliber Browning was no longer a novelty, it was a revolution. Entire squadrons had been transformed, and the air war itself was beginning to bend under its relentless force. What had once been fragile, underarmed fighters were now flying fortresses of speed and fire, capable of delivering a storm of bullets that seemed impossible to dodge. Imagine a P-51 Mustang streaking across the clouds, 6 Browning barrels aligned like thunderclouds in its wings. A formation of enemy Messerschmitts or Focke-Wulfs appears on the horizon, confident in their speed, confident in their ability to outmaneuver the Americans. And then, the first burst. The sky erupts in fire and shrapnel. Sheets of aluminum and smoke peel away from enemy aircraft. Pilots dive, twist, and barrel roll, trying to escape, but the .50 caliber bites with surgical precision. In seconds, the Hunter becomes the hunted. The firepower revolution was not just technical, it was psychological. Enemy pilots, once unshakable under their own dominance, began to fear the glint of American wings. Intelligence reports tell of entire formations breaking off at the first sign of Browning fire, of commanders recalculating plans in fear of the new predator in the sky. No longer were Allied fighters pawns, they were apex predators, dictating the tempo of battle. Behind this transformation was mastery, pilots learning to leverage the weapon's raw potential. Strafing runs against airfields, bomber escorts, and dogfights all changed in tempo and strategy. A well-aimed burst could rip through a bomber's engine or wing control in a heartbeat, turning a coordinated threat into a flaming wreck. Training manuals evolved. Pilots drilled for accuracy over volume, learning the delicate art of conserving rounds while maximizing impact. Every shot counted, every maneuver amplified by the deadly tool in their hands. And yet, the revolution was not without its risks. Recoil could destabilize a maneuver mid-turn, barrels overheated under prolonged engagement, enemy gunners adapted, weaving unpredictable patterns. Each sortie was a test of courage, skill, and instinct. But those who mastered it became legends. Their kills tallied not just in numbers, but in the audacity of their attacks. The .50 caliber had changed the rules. It rewarded aggression, decisiveness, and fearlessness. Across Europe and the Pacific, the impact was undeniable. Enemy air superiority evaporated where Browning-equipped squadrons took the lead. Convoys were protected, bombing raids succeeded, and American morale soared. The weapon had leveled technological gaps, turning what was once a gamble into a calculated strike. The skies, once a domain of the fast and ruthless, were now the hunting ground of a new breed of pilot, flying faster, striking harder, and leaving destruction in their wake. The firepower revolution was complete. It was not just a machine gun. It was a signal. The balance of aerial combat had shifted. Where once death stalked American airmen with impunity, now fear had a new name, the unmistakable half-inch roar of the Browning. The skies belonged to those who wielded it with mastery, precision, and unflinching courage. In the cockpit, amidst the roar of engines and the spray of spent casings, pilots felt it, a sense of invincibility, tempered by respect. They were not merely fighting, they were hunting, orchestrating chaos with calculated bursts of deadly efficiency. And every enemy plane that fell was proof. The age of the Predator had arrived, and it was forged in .50 caliber fire. Iconic engagements. The sky over Europe in 1944 was a battlefield of steel, speed, and fire. P-51 Mustangs, P-38 Lightnings, and even B-17 flying fortresses equipped with .50 caliber Browning machine guns carved paths through the clouds, rewriting aerial combat. Each sortie became a stage for acts of sheer audacity. Pilots would streak into formations of enemy fighters, their 6-gun wings unleashing torrents of bullets with terrifying precision. The roar of the Browning was the sound of sudden death, an instant verdict for anyone who dared stand in its path. Take, for instance, the Mustang pilots escorting bombers over Berlin. Enemy Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts swarmed with the confidence of years of air dominance. But the Americans, trained to exploit the Browning's firepower, engaged with a blend of calculated aggression and instinct. In seconds, enemy planes were shredded, engines ignited, and the sky became a canvas of smoke and falling wreckage. Pilots reported seeing entire squadrons crumble under the relentless hail of .50 caliber fire. It was precision combined with terror, every burst a statement that the Allies were no longer prey, but predators. In the Pacific, the story repeated itself in a different theater, but with the same lethal effect. The Hellcats and Corsairs prowled above the islands, hunting Zeros that had once been untouchable. A single strafing run along an enemy airfield could leave dozens of aircraft ablaze before gunners even realized the threat. And when aerial dogfights erupted, the .50 caliber allowed American pilots to strike first, then disappear into clouds or the safety of sun-splashed skies, leaving disoriented enemies in their wake. These engagements were not just tactical victories, they were psychological blows. Enemy pilots began to hesitate, even retreat, at the first hint of a Browning burst. Veteran airmen recounted moments where entire formations of skilled foes scattered, unable to face the deadly hail from what seemed like small, fragile fighters. The machine gun's reputation spread faster than any propaganda. It was the weapon that could turn the tide of a mission in seconds, that could make the impossible possible. But amid the glory, the cost was never forgotten. Pilots knew every engagement could be their last. A single miscalculation, a missed burst, or an unexpected maneuver from the enemy could turn hunter into hunted. Every mission demanded nerves of steel, split-second decisions, and an intimate understanding of the Browning's capabilities. It was not simply about pulling the trigger, it was about timing, positioning, and the unshakable courage to stare into the eye of death and act with precision. And yet, through the chaos, stories of heroism emerged. Pilots saving entire bomber formations, strafing convoys to halt critical supplies, or diving headfirst into dogfights to protect comrades. These iconic engagements, chronicled in mission reports and memoirs, became legend. They were not just about firepower, they were about human will, skill, and the bond between pilot and machine. The .50 caliber Browning had given them the tool, but it was their audacity that forged victory. By the end of the war, these battles had left an indelible mark. Enemy skies that once belonged to the Luftwaffe or the Imperial Japanese Navy were no longer safe. The Browning had proven itself not as a mere gun, but as the instrument of a revolution in aerial warfare. And every story of its deadly efficiency served as a reminder. In the hands of the brave and the skilled, the sky was no longer a limit, it was a hunting ground. Human stories in the skies. Amid the roar of engines and the staccato bursts of .50 caliber fire, it was the human element that defined the war in the skies. Each pilot, a young man barely out of his teens, faced a battlefield that could change in an instant. Some were Midwest farm boys who had never seen a plane faster than a barnstormer's biplane, now hurtling through clouds at 400 miles per hour with death at every turn. Others were seasoned mechanics or test pilots, thrust into combat where the margin for error was measured in seconds. In the cockpit, the Browning wasn't just a weapon, it was an extension of the pilot's reflexes, instincts, and courage. Fingers hovered over triggers, eyes scanned for flashes of enemy wings, and hearts raced as tracer rounds cut through the sky. A single misjudgment could mean collision, capture, or fiery death. Yet, in that crucible, bonds were forged stronger than steel. Pilots relied on each other implicitly, wingmen guarding flanks, radar operators calling out contacts, gunners coordinating bursts. Trust was their lifeline, and the Browning's firepower gave them the confidence to act without hesitation. Consider Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Parker, a Mustang pilot flying escort missions over northern France. In one engagement, he watched as a formation of P-38s became tangled with Focke-Wulfs. With split-second timing, Parker unleashed a controlled volley from his 6.50 calibers, shredding one enemy fighter and sending another tumbling out of formation. But victory came with cost. A fellow wingman was hit, parachuting into unknown fields below. Parker's hands shook, not from fear, but from the raw human weight of responsibility. Each engagement was a blend of exhilaration and grief, adrenaline and reflection. In the Pacific theater, the stories were no less intense. Marine pilots strafing Japanese airstrips often had to fly mere feet above the treetops, watching for hidden anti-aircraft fire while unleashing the deadly hail of .50 caliber rounds. Some missions lasted mere minutes, but they felt like hours, hearts pounding in synchrony with every engine roar. The bond between pilot and machine became almost symbiotic. Every vibration of the cockpit, every recoil of the Browning, became a signal, a rhythm guiding split-second decisions that could save or end lives. These human stories were also tales of ingenuity under pressure. Pilots learned to synchronize fire with speed, to anticipate enemy maneuvers, to turn a burst of bullets into a tactical advantage. And in those tense moments, the Browning became more than steel, and it became a lifeline, a protector, and sometimes the last hope. Letters home described the fear, the awe, and the camaraderie of the raw humanity behind each aerial encounter. The machine gun was powerful, yes, but it was the people who wielded it that transformed potential into legend. By war's end, the human stories of courage, split-second heroism, and sacrifice became inseparable from the Browning itself. Each icon of aerial combat, every strafing run, every formation defense, every desperate chase through clouds was a testament to the men who mastered it. The weapon turned them into deadly predators of the skies, yes, but it also revealed their vulnerability, their bravery, and their indomitable will to survive and protect. In the skies, between bursts of machine gun fire and whistling enemy rounds, the story of war was not just written in damage reports, it was etched into the hearts and souls of those who dared to ride the storm. Tactical evolution. As the war raged across continents and oceans, pilots quickly realized that raw firepower alone was not enough. The .50 caliber Browning had unleashed a new era of aerial dominance, but mastery of this weapon required strategy, timing, and innovation. Dogfights were no longer chaotic exchanges of bullets and chance. They became carefully orchestrated ballets of speed, altitude, and calculated bursts. Squadrons adapted. Formation flying evolved beyond simple lines of aircraft into intricate patterns designed to maximize fire coverage while minimizing exposure. Lead pilots coordinated attacks, wingmen flanked with precision, and every strafing run or interception was planned down to the second. The Browning's rate of fire allowed for devastating volleys, but ammunition was finite, and in the heat of battle, conservation became as crucial as aggression. One misjudged burst could leave a fighter empty-handed, vulnerable to counterattack. In the skies over Europe, P-51 Mustangs learned to leverage the Browning's range and stability, engaging enemy fighters at distances once thought impossible. Pilots timed bursts to clip wings, disable engines, or jam control surfaces without wasting rounds. The sound of synchronized .50 caliber fire became both a warning and a signal. Precision, not recklessness, defined survival. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Corsairs and Hellcats adapted their strafing techniques to jungle-covered airfields and fortified coastal positions. Pilots discovered that angled approaches, surprise dives, and rapid-fire sweeps could neutralize anti-aircraft emplacements while minimizing risk. Each engagement was a lesson in patience and instinct, the Browning a deadly tutor in aerial mathematics. But tactical evolution wasn't limited to maneuvers. Maintenance crews innovated ways to increase reliability under extreme conditions. Humidity, salt spray, and constant vibration threatened to jam even the most meticulously engineered guns. Pilots learned to read the rhythm of their weapons, to feel misfires before they happened, and to adjust their throttle, altitude, and angle in response. In these moments, human skill intertwined seamlessly with mechanical precision. The cost of adaptation was relentless. Pilots faced countless close calls, narrowly avoiding collisions, anti-aircraft fire, and enemy fighters. Each engagement became a crucible, teaching lessons in endurance, resilience, and trust, not only in themselves, but in their machine, their squadron, and the Browning that roared beside them. By mid-war, the lessons crystallized into doctrine. Aircrews no longer saw the .50 caliber as just a weapon. It was a force multiplier, shaping tactics, squadron coordination, and even mission planning. From strafing runs over Europe's industrial heartlands to dogfights above the Pacific atolls, the Browning redefined what it meant to dominate the skies. Pilots were no longer just participants. They were choreographers of destruction, their every maneuver amplified by the lethal rhythm of their machine guns. And as tactics evolved, so did the psychology of aerial combat. Confidence replaced fear, precision replaced panic, and in the split seconds between threat and action, the Browning became both shield and sword, a tangible extension of a pilot's will, instinct, and determination to survive. In the end, tactical evolution wasn't merely about how to shoot, it was about how to think, anticipate, and transform the chaos of battle into orchestrated supremacy. The skies had become a classroom, and the students were hardened, fearless men, their lessons written in the trails of smoke and tracer fire left by the .50 caliber Browning. Countering the Luftwaffe and kamikaze threats. By 1943, the skies over Europe and the Pacific had become lethal chessboards, where every pilot's move could mean life or death. In the West, the Luftwaffe's twin-engine fighters and well-coordinated bomber formations pressed relentlessly. Across the Pacific, a new nightmare emerged: kamikaze attacks, where Japanese pilots sacrificed themselves to destroy Allied ships. The Browning .50 caliber, once a tool of dominance, now faced its ultimate test. In Europe, Mustang pilots patrolled vast corridors above the clouds, intercepting fast-moving Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. Each engagement demanded split-second judgment. The Browning's rate of fire allowed them to punch through enemy armor before the enemy could react, but timing was everything. One burst too early, and the fighter escaped; too late, and the Mustang risked a tail gunner's bullets or a fatal collision. Pilots adapted, learning to fire in controlled, precise sweeps, aiming not for chaos but for surgical destruction. Every mission became a deadly equation, a careful balance of aggression and patience. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the kamikaze threat pushed pilots to the edge of instinct. Ships on the horizon became targets for suicide attacks, the pilots themselves blazing like comets. Fighters armed with Browning guns dove and weaved through flak and fire, their tracers carving arcs through the sky as they shredded approaching aircraft. In these moments, courage was measured not just by speed or firepower, but by timing, intuition, and trust in the machine. Pilots became hunters, their eyes scanning for split-second openings while their fingers squeezed triggers with cold precision. Aircrews developed new formations, combining high-altitude scouts with low-flying interceptors, a deadly dance that leveraged the Browning's range and reliability. Squadron leaders coordinated attacks as if orchestrating a symphony tracer line cutting the darkness, engines screaming, bullets tearing through fuselages. Each success was a testament to human ingenuity paired with mechanical might. The psychological toll was immense. Pilots faced death in every dogfight, every strafing run, every interception. The roar of the Browning became both a comfort and a warning, a constant reminder that survival depended on skill, reflexes, and split-second decisions. Stories emerged of pilots saving ships and crews by inches, their .50 caliber guns punching through wings, fuselages, and engines with a precision that often spelled the difference between life and annihilation. In these skies, the Browning transformed from a weapon into a lifeline. Its devastating firepower gave pilots the confidence to engage where others would hesitate, to challenge formations that seemed invincible. And as pilots honed their tactics against both Luftwaffe aces and kamikaze pilots, the .50 caliber proved itself more than a machine gun. It was the backbone of Allied aerial supremacy, a metal extension of human courage in a war where hesitation meant death. By the end of these brutal campaigns, a new reality was clear: the skies were no longer dominated by fear. They belonged to those who could think faster, fly smarter, and unleash the deadly rhythm of the Browning with unerring precision. The weapon had not just survived the crucible of war, it had reshaped it, proving that in the hands of the trained, the disciplined, and the fearless, a single .50 caliber gun could turn the tide of air battles across continents and oceans. The psychological edge. The .50 caliber Browning was more than steel and gunpowder, it was a weapon that reshaped minds, both friend and foe. In the cockpit, pilots felt an almost primal confidence coursing through their veins. They knew that in a fleeting moment of chaos, a few bursts from their Browning could destroy a fighter plane, silence a bomber's guns, or carve a path through the kamikaze onslaught. Every squeeze of the trigger became a heartbeat, a measure of control against the unpredictable fury of war. Enemy pilots quickly learned this terror. Luftwaffe fighters, once aggressive and untouchable, began to hesitate at the sight of Allied Mustangs or Thunderbolts bearing the distinctive heavy machine guns. The split-second whine of the .50 caliber's bullets was unmistakable, a harbinger of destruction. In the Pacific, Kamikaze pilots hesitated mid-dive, sometimes veering away when tracers illuminated their cockpit, exposing vulnerabilities they hadn't accounted for. The Browning had become not just a weapon of death, but a psychological predator, instilling fear before the first shot even landed. Inside the cockpit, the psychological edge manifested in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Pilots learned to trust the gun instinctively, predicting how its recoil would influence flight, how bursts could stagger formations, how synchronized volleys could collapse enemy tactics. Confidence grew in tandem with skill, and with confidence came audacity. Fighters would dive into impossible angles, push past flak-heavy skies, and execute maneuvers that a less armed plane could never attempt. The gun gave them a freedom born from power, the ability to dictate the tempo of battle. The effect on enemy morale was devastating. Stories emerged of Luftwaffe pilots ejecting or retreating when faced with Mustangs lined with Browning barrels, of Japanese kamikaze squadrons losing cohesion because the moment they locked onto a target, Allied gunners struck first. The knowledge that a machine gun could punch through wings, fuel tanks, and cockpits created hesitation, a pause that was fatal in air combat. Every mission became as much a mental war as a physical one. Yet, for Allied pilots, the psychological edge came with a heavy weight. The gun demanded responsibility. One misfire, one burst too late, could mean the difference between saving a comrade or witnessing death. The roar of the Browning became the soundtrack of both hope and horror, a constant reminder that survival required split-second decisions, unwavering nerves, and trust in both machine and self. Pilots reported the intoxicating rhythm of the gun, the almost hypnotic cycle of firing, reloading, adjusting aim, a rhythm that could steady hands and sharpen focus under the worst conditions imaginable. By the mid-war campaigns, the .50 caliber Browning had achieved a legend beyond its specifications. It shaped air tactics, dictated engagement ranges, and redefined what it meant to dominate the sky. More than its metal, more than its ammunition, it was a weapon that preyed on fear while instilling courage, a dual-edged force that gave the Allied air forces an undeniable psychological supremacy. The skies were no longer merely a theater of combat. They were a proving ground of mind and will, where the sound of .50 caliber tracers could tip the balance of life and death before a single bomb was dropped or a wing clipped. The edge it provided wasn't just technical, it was profoundly human. Pilots who wielded it became sharper, faster, more confident, their instincts honed by the deadly reliability of the Browning. And every enemy who faced it learned, often too late, that the .50 caliber was not merely a gun, it was a symbol of dominance, a relentless predator in the deadly skies of World War II. Post-war legacy and influence. When the guns fell silent and the smoke cleared, the .50 caliber Browning did not fade into history. It echoed across decades, a monument to ingenuity and sheer destructive elegance. Pilots who had flown Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and B-17s carried the memory of that weapon long after they left the cockpit. It had taught them lessons in precision, timing, and the unforgiving calculus of survival. Each pilot knew that mastery of the Browning was mastery of the skies themselves, a truth that would shape air combat doctrine for generations. In the post-war world, the legacy of the .50 caliber spread far beyond World War II's battlefields. Jet aircraft, helicopters, and even modern fighter planes inherited the principles it had proven: concentrated firepower, rapid response, and the psychological intimidation that comes from lethal speed. The gun's design, elegant in its simplicity yet devastating in function, influenced generations of weapons engineers. Its barrels, receivers, and belt-fed ammunition became a blueprint for reliability under stress, a standard that no airborne machine gun could ignore. Veterans recounted that Browning had been more than a tool, it was a teacher. It taught them how to anticipate enemy movements, how to read the air, and how to act with precision under extreme pressure. Many spoke of its hum as both terrifying and empowering, the roar that announced death for one side and survival for the other. This duality defined the post-war psyche of pilots: respect for technology paired with reverence for the human skill needed to wield it effectively. The gun's influence extended into popular culture and military legend. Books, films, and documentaries immortalized the era when a single pilot's Browning could turn the tide of a dogfight. Its name became synonymous with deadly efficiency, and its image, barrel glinting under sunlight, tracers streaking through clouds, etched into the collective imagination of air warriors and enthusiasts alike. But the most profound legacy was tactical. The .50 caliber Browning proved that mobility, speed, and precision could rival sheer size and armor. It reshaped air combat strategy, teaching future generations that dominance in the sky required more than raw numbers. It demanded mastery of firepower, innovation in engagement, and courage under relentless pressure. Its lessons echoed in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, wherever air-to-air or air-to-ground combat tested both machine and pilot. Even today, the gun continues to serve in multiple forms, mounted on helicopters, fighter jets, and naval craft. Its design remains largely unchanged, a testament to the perfection achieved during those crucible years. Each bullet fired from a Browning barrel carries not just kinetic energy, but the distilled experience of countless airmen who learned the terrifying grace of controlling death from above. In every sense, the .50 caliber Browning did more than arm aircraft. It transformed the human approach to aerial warfare. It reminded the world that technology and courage, when fused, could turn fragile machines into predators of the skies. The legend endures, not just in museum halls or military archives, but in the minds of those who understand what it meant to hold the line against a relentless enemy, trusting a barrel of steel and a heartbeat of human skill to dictate life and death at 400 miles per hour. It was more than a weapon. It was a revolution. And the echoes of its fire still soar through the history of flight. The sun sets over empty airfields, the roar of engines replaced by the whisper of wind through hangars. The .50 caliber Browning sits silent now, barrels gleaming but still, a monument to the men who trusted it with their lives. In its steel heart lives the memory of countless pilots who stared into the abyss, who knew that in the split second between life and death, mastery of this weapon could make the difference. It was more than firepower. It was a bridge between human skill and mechanical precision. A lone Mustang racing across a crimson sky, wings cutting through clouds, tracers streaming from its nose, carries the echoes of every pilot who learned to dance with danger. Each burst of the Browning was a heartbeat, each reload a prayer, each hit a testament to courage, discipline, and a relentless will to survive. In the chaos of battle, the Browning turned ordinary aircraft into predators of the skies. It gave pilots confidence in moments of desperation, fear of their enemies, and a sense that, even against impossible odds, technology and human instinct together could dominate. And yet, it also demanded respect for the fragility of life and the weight of responsibility that comes with wielding such concentrated power. Across oceans, through decades, and in every theater of war that followed, the lessons endured. Precision, adaptability, courage under fire, these were the legacies of a gun that defined an era. It reshaped strategy, redefined what a pilot could accomplish, and proved that even a machine designed to kill could elevate the human spirit through mastery, innovation, and sheer determination. And now, as the skies return to calm and the tracers fade into memory, we remember the human element, the young airmen who climbed into cockpits at dawn, hearts pounding, trusting cold steel to amplify their courage. They carried not only ammunition but the hopes of nations, the weight of comrades, and the certainty that every moment counted. The .50 caliber Browning was their partner, their weapon, and in some ways, their teacher. It reminds us that greatness is never simply about power or size. It is about precision, speed, courage, and the willingness to act when the stakes are highest. In the story of the skies, the Browning is more than a gun. It is a symbol of human ingenuity, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between man and machine. The aircraft may have grown faster, stronger, and more advanced since those early days, but the lessons of the .50 caliber endure. Every dogfight, every air patrol, every moment of decision in the cockpit still carries its shadow. And in remembering it, we honor the pilots, the engineers, and the audacity of a weapon that turned fragile planes into legends of the sky. Small, precise, relentless, the .50 caliber Browning showed the world that in the crucible of war, skill and courage could wield power beyond mere numbers. And in the vast theater of the heavens, where danger waits in every cloud and behind every horizon, its echo continues to remind us, the sky belongs to those who dare to master it.